Man, I'm at the gym yesterday morning just trying to get my workout in before work, and I've got ESPN playing on one of the TVs in front of the treadmill. First Take comes on, and normally, I might not pay super close attention because I'm focused on my run, but then I see the graphics come up showing the Los Angeles Rams logo, and I hear Molly Karam say something about breaking news, and I'm like, okay, let me actually watch this, because the Rams have been making so many moves lately. So I slow down my pace and really tune in, and there's Stephen A. Smith at the desk with Mad Dog Russo, and you can tell from their expressions that they're about to discuss something major. Hey, what's up everyone? Before we dive into everything I have for you today, I need to share something real with you that would mean the absolute world to me. That subscribe button right there, hitting it right now, would bring me one step closer to my dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers. I know you're eager to get into all this content, but real quick, just smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. It's such a simple thing. It takes literally 1 second, but it's honestly the biggest way you can support this journey and help me reach that milestone. Trust me, every single subscription gets me closer to that goal. And honestly, it would mean everything to me. So, do me that quick favor right now and be part of this dream becoming reality. Stephen A. opens the segment by talking about the Rams extending both Sean McVay and Les Snead to multi-year contract extensions. He's going on about how this is a no-brainer move by owner Stan Kroenke, how McVay and Snead have been one of the most successful head coach and general manager duos in the NFL over the past decade, and how the Rams are clearly committing to continuity and stability moving forward. Stephen A. talks about McVay's record of 92 wins and 57 losses since taking over, 4 NFC West titles, 7 playoff appearances, 2 Super Bowl appearances including 1 championship in 2021. He says this is exactly what you want from your leadership, and extending them was the obvious right move. Mad Dog is nodding along and he says, yeah, McVay and Snead have had tremendous success together. They've built a culture in Los Angeles that's focused on winning and competing for championships every single year. But then Mad Dog says, here's the thing, the Rams are at a crossroads right now with their franchise quarterback Matthew Stafford potentially retiring. And if Stafford does walk away, McVay and Snead are going to have to figure out their quarterback situation pretty quickly because you can't compete in the NFC West without a capable signal caller. Then Stephen A. says something that absolutely caught me off guard. He says, according to sources he's been talking to around the league, the Rams have had internal discussions about what their quarterback plans would be if Stafford retires. And one name that's come up in those conversations is Tua Tagovailoa from the Miami Dolphins. When I hear this, I literally almost fall off the treadmill because Tua to the Rams? That seems so random and unexpected. But then Stephen A. starts explaining the logic, and honestly, the more he talks about it, the more I'm like, okay, I can kind of see where this is coming from. Stephen A. says, look, the Dolphins are in a really difficult position with Tua because of all his concussion issues and because of his expensive contract, and they might be looking to move on from him and start fresh with a new quarterback. The Rams, on the other hand, are going to need a quarterback if Stafford retires, and they have a few different options. They could draft someone with a high pick, they could sign a veteran free agent, or they could trade for someone who's already established in the league but available. Stephen A. says Tua fits into that third category, and while he comes with significant health concerns, he's also shown that when healthy, he can be a really productive quarterback in the right system. Mad Dog immediately jumps all over this idea. He's like, Stephen A., are you seriously suggesting the Rams should trade for a quarterback who's had multiple serious concussions and who might retire at any moment? Mad Dog says that makes absolutely no sense for a team like the Rams who are trying to compete for championships. You need stability and reliability at quarterback, not someone who's one hit away from potentially having to walk away from the game. Stephen A. doesn't back down though. He comes right back and says, Mad Dog, every quarterback in the NFL is one hit away from a serious injury. That's the nature of the position. And yes, Tua has had concussion problems, but he's also a former Pro Bowl quarterback who, when healthy, has thrown for over 40 touchdowns in a season and been in the MVP conversation. Molly jumps in at this point and asks what Sean McVay would be thinking in all of this. Because McVay has had tremendous success with quarterbacks throughout his career, he turned Jared Goff from a struggling #1 overall pick into a Pro Bowl quarterback. He's gotten MVP-caliber play out of Matthew Stafford, and he knows what he wants in his system. Stephen A. says that's actually one of the reasons why this could make sense, because McVay's offensive system is very similar to what Mike McDaniel runs in Miami. They both come from the Shanahan coaching tree, and Tua has thrived in that kind of offense. Stephen A. talks about how McVay emphasizes quick passing, play action, getting the ball to playmakers in space, and all of that plays directly to Tua's strengths as a quarterback. Mad Dog asks what the actual trade would look like and what the Rams would have to give up. Stephen A. says he thinks the Dolphins wouldn't be asking for a huge return given all the concerns about Tua's health and his expensive contract, maybe a 3rd or 4th round pick, plus the Dolphins eating some of Tua's guaranteed money to make it work from a cap perspective. Mad Dog says, okay, but even if the price is low, you're still taking on a player with massive red flags, and that's not the kind of move a team that's trying to win championships should be making. The conversation shifts to talking about how Tua would fit into the Rams roster and offensive system. Stephen A. gets really detailed about this, talking about how the Rams have elite weapons like Puka Nacua, who's going to get a massive extension soon, Cooper Kupp, who just went to Seattle, but the Rams still have other receivers, and tight ends that can be productive in McVay's system. He says if you put Tua in that offense with those weapons and with McVay calling the plays, there's no reason Tua can't be successful. Stephen A. mentions that the Rams also have a pretty good offensive line. They just extended Les Snead, who's been incredible at finding talent in the draft, and they're positioned to compete immediately if they have capable quarterback play. Mad Dog brings up concerns about Tua's arm strength and whether he can make all the throws that McVay's offense requires. He says Tua has always had limitations in terms of pushing the ball down the field and making throws outside the numbers, and those limitations could be more exposed in Los Angeles than they were in Miami, where he had elite speed at receiver with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Stephen A. says, but the Rams don't need their quarterback to have the biggest arm in the league. They need someone who's accurate, who can get the ball out quickly, who can execute the play-action game, and Tua can absolutely do all of those things. They spend some time discussing the financial side of this potential trade. Mad Dog mentions that Tua is on a big contract extension that he signed with Miami, and taking on that money would eat up a significant portion of the Rams' salary cap. Stephen A. says, yeah, that's true, but the Rams have shown they're willing to spend money when they think it helps them win championships. They've been one of the highest spending teams in the league for years, and if they believe Tua can be their quarterback for the next few seasons, they'll figure out a way to make the money work. He also mentions that with the NFL expanding the salary cap, teams have more flexibility than ever before to take on contracts like Tua. Molly asks them to talk about what Matthew Stafford's timeline is for making his retirement decision. Stephen A. says McVay mentioned in the press conference after announcing the extensions that Stafford is taking his time to make a decision. He's talking with his family, listening to his body, and trying to figure out if he wants to come back for year 18. Stephen A. says he personally thinks Stafford is going to come back because he just had an MVP-caliber season, and he's not the type of guy to walk away when he's still playing at such a high level. Mad Dog says yeah, but Stafford is also getting older. He's dealt with injuries throughout his career, and at some point, he's going to decide that his health and his family are more important than playing football. The conversation continues, and they start talking about other Rams news that came out of the McVay press conference. Stephen A. mentions that McVay talked about the offensive coordinator search and how they're going to do an extensive search that includes outside candidates, not just promote Nate Scheelhaase from within. Mad Dog says that's interesting because Scheelhaase has been with the Rams for a while and he's been interviewed for head coaching jobs, so clearly other teams see value in him. Stephen A. says, "Yeah, but McVay is a perfectionist, and he wants to make sure he gets the right guy, so doing a thorough search makes sense, even if Shieldhouse ends up being the choice at the end of the day." They also discuss the possibility of Rob Havenstein and Tyler Higbee retiring. Stephen A. says McVay mentioned that both of those guys are taking time to make decisions about their futures, and he thinks both of them are pretty likely to call it quits, given their injury histories and their age. Mad Dog says, "Yeah, and if both of those guys retire, that creates even more holes on the roster that the Rams are going to have to fill either through the draft or free agency." Stephen A. brings up Davante Adams and how McVay made it very clear in the press conference that Adams is going to be back with the Rams next season. He says McVay was quoted as saying, "Absolutely, he will be back next year," and that should put to rest any speculation about Adams being traded or released. Mad Dog says, "Yeah, Adams is still a really productive receiver, and he was great for the Rams last season, so it makes sense to keep him around, especially if you're potentially breaking in a new quarterback." The conversation shifts back to the Tua discussion, and they start talking about the risks versus rewards of making this trade. Stephen A. says, "Look, trading for Tua is definitely a gamble. Nobody's denying that. But the Rams are in a position where they might need to take a gamble if Stafford retires, because the other options aren't great. You could draft a quarterback, but rookie quarterbacks are hit or miss, and there's no guarantee you get someone who can start right away. You could sign a veteran free agent, but the options this year aren't very exciting. Or you could trade for someone like Tua, who when healthy has shown he can be a really good quarterback in the NFL." Mad Dog pushes back and says, "But why take that risk when you could just convince Stafford to come back for one more year and then draft a quarterback next year when the class might be better?" Stephen A. says, "Because you can't control whether Stafford wants to come back or not, and if he decides to retire, the Rams need to have a plan in place." He says trading for Tua gives them options. If Stafford comes back, then maybe Tua is the backup, and you have insurance. And if Stafford retires, then Tua becomes the starter, and you're not scrambling to find a solution. Molly brings up the ethical concerns about trading for Tua given all his concussion issues. She asks whether it's responsible for the Rams to bring in a player who's at such high risk for another serious head injury. Stephen A. gets serious for a moment and says, "That's a question that goes beyond football and gets into larger issues about player safety and what teams' responsibilities are to their players." He says Tua is an adult who can make his own decisions about whether he wants to continue playing, but teams also have a responsibility to make sure they're not putting players in dangerous situations. Stephen A. says if the Rams were to trade for Tua, they'd need to have very honest conversations with him and his medical team about the risks involved. Mad Dog says that's exactly why this trade is a terrible idea, because even if Tua is willing to play and take the risk, the Rams would be opening themselves up to massive criticism and potential legal issues if something bad happens. Mad Dog says the optics of trading for a player with known concussion problems just to use him as your starting quarterback are really bad, and it would be a PR nightmare for the franchise. Stephen A. says, but teams have to make difficult decisions all the time, and if the Rams believe the football benefits outweigh the risks, they have to be willing to deal with whatever criticism comes their way. They also talk about what the Rams' overall offseason plan would look like if they made this trade. Stephen A. mentions that Les Snead has been incredible at finding talent in the draft. He drafted Aaron Donald 13th overall, which was a steal. He got Cooper Kupp in the 3rd round. He got Puka Nacua in the 5th round, and he's consistently found value throughout the draft. Stephen A. says, if you have a GM like that, who knows how to build a roster, you can afford to take a chance on a quarterback like Tua, because you trust that you'll be able to surround him with enough talent to succeed. Mad Dog brings up the fact that the Rams traded for Matthew Stafford a few years ago, and that trade worked out perfectly for them. They won a Super Bowl in Stafford's first year with the team. Mad Dog asks whether the Rams are trying to recreate that magic by trading for another veteran quarterback who's available. Stephen A. says, "That's an interesting comparison, but the situations are different. Stafford was a proven elite quarterback who just needed a change of scenery, whereas Tua is more of a question mark because of his health issue." The conversation continues, and they start talking about other quarterback options the Rams might have if Stafford retires. Stephen A. mentions guys like Sam Darnold, who's a free agent and who had a pretty good season with Minnesota, or maybe Russell Wilson, who's also going to be available. Mad Dog says, "Yeah, those are options, but none of those guys have the upside that Tua has when he's healthy, and if you're the Rams and you're trying to win championships, you want the quarterback with the highest ceiling." Molly tries to get them to make predictions about whether this trade is actually going to happen. Stephen A. says he thinks there's maybe a 35% chance the Rams make a move for Tua. It's definitely being discussed internally, but there are a lot of variables, including whether Stafford retires and whether the Dolphins are actually willing to move Tua. Mad Dog says he thinks it's less than 20%, he just doesn't see the logic in it, and he thinks the Rams have better options available to them. The segment starts winding down, and they both kind of summarize their position. Stephen A. says the Rams need to be proactive and have contingency plans in place for every scenario, and trading for Tua Tagovailoa is one option they should seriously consider if Matthew Stafford retires. Mad Dog says he thinks it's too risky, and the Rams would be better off either convincing Stafford to come back or finding a safer veteran option that doesn't come with all of Tua's baggage. Molly thanks them both, and the show goes to commercial. I'm finishing up my workout, just trying to process everything I heard. Tua Tagovailoa to the Los Angeles Rams is absolutely not something I would have predicted, and it seems like such a high-risk move that could go either way. But after hearing Stephen A. explain the football logic behind it, I can kind of see how it might make sense if you're the Rams and you're facing the possibility of losing your franchise quarterback to retirement. Whether it actually happens or not is anyone's guess, but it's definitely one of the more interesting potential storylines for the offseason, and it shows how unpredictable the NFL can be when teams are trying to solve their quarterback situation.